Hello, everyone. Welcome to How to Read Chinese Poetry podcast. I'm Zong-qi, the program host. In this podcast program, my colleagues and I aim to introduce cutting-edge scholarship on Chinese poetry to a broad general audience. We will present 52 episodes covering the major poetic genres developed over China's long history. Each episode features close reading of one or more of the best-known Chinese poems, with an aim to illuminate their literary greatness and cultural significance. For all the discussed poems, Chinese text, English translation, romanization, and brief notes are provided at our website, howtoreadchinesepoetry.com. By following the 52 episodes, listener will gain a bird's-eye view of the thematic, formal, and generic evolution of Chinese poetry from antiquity to the modern era. Instruct and delight is what we wish to accomplish in each talk. Without further ado, let's begin. Today, our guest host, Professor Kern, will present his second episode entitled The Fusion of Poetry and Biography. Let us welcome Professor Kern.
Welcome, everyone, to my second podcast episode on Qu Yuan and the Lisao. Today, I will be exploring how Qu Yuan's poetry and biography flow seamlessly into each other and constitute each other in the process. How do the persona of Qu Yuan and the poetry attributed to him come together? Is it even possible to read one without the other and still have a meaningful text? Are the poetry and the biography simply two different ways of telling the same story, distributed and shared across multiple texts? Let us begin with the obvious. The Lisao does not lend itself to a biographical reading. It mentions nothing about the historical Qu Yuan. Its biographical or autobiographical reading depends entirely on external material collected from a range of other sources. The biography in the Shiji, the two short pieces in the Chuzi anthology titled Buju, Divining Where to Reside, and Yufu, the Fisherman, that speak about Qu Yuan in the third person, but are nevertheless attributed to him. Other Han poems, both within and outside the anthology, and various Han Dynasty comments and entire commentaries, most fully Wang Yi's Chuzi Zhangju, the chapter and verse commentary to the Chuzi, that we have transmitted in the Song Dynasty Chuzi Buzhu, the supplementary annotations to the Chuzi. One cannot construct a Qu Yuan persona from the Lisao itself. In fact, nobody could have connected the poem to the person were it not for the various external materials that relate the person to the text. At first glance, this may be surprising to readers of the Lisao, a text replete with the first-person pronoun I. No other early Chinese poem speaks in this way. Consider just the opening 3 stanzas of the Lisao, of altogether 12 lines. Distant descendant of the god Gaoyang am I. My august father's name was Boyong. The Sheti constellation pointed to the first month of the year. It was the cyclical day, Gengyin, when I descended. The August One surveyed me and took my original measure, rising to bestow on me auspicious names. He named me correct standard. He styled me numinous balance. Lush am I, possessed of this inner beauty, further doubled in fine appearance, shrouded in lovage and iris, weaving the autumn orchid as my girdle. These 3 stanzas of 12 lines present the protagonist as a mythological persona of divine ancestry. On an auspicious day, he descends into the world like a god and introduces himself in an intensely personal voice. Could this have been the voice of an individual poet? In which cultural environment does this make sense? To which audience? Did a 3rd century BCE Chinese poet call himself a descendant of the gods? Let me offer a different reading. The I in these 12 lines, present in 7 first-person pronouns, is the hero staged and the hero remembered. He is impersonated in front of an audience, perhaps at Liuan's court in Shouchun. The performative nature of this impersonation is linguistically marked. Remember, this inner beauty is a deictic expression that gestures at the staged persona, which the audience understood to be Qu Yuan. In short, the Lisao is not an autobiographic poem, but a dramatic representation of Qu Yuan's voice. It is the poetic culmination of the Qu Yuan story, and as such, part of the Qu Yuan biographical lore. Qu Yuan's biography in the Shiji is an incoherent patchwork of multiple sources that cannot even agree on the name of their protagonist. Qu Yuan, who is named as the author of Huaisha, or Embracing Sand, or Qu Ping, who is named as the author of the Lisao. The different sources do not agree whether the Lisao was composed before or in response to its author's exile. Qu Yuan and Qu Ping, neither one mentioned in the Lisao, may well refer to the same historical person, but the biography does not harmonize them into one. As such, it opens a window on the rich and diverse nature of early Qu Yuan lore and its different traditions of mythological narrative and poetic performance. The biography reveals that the literary material surrounding Qu Yuan existed in multiple parallel versions. Thus, when we find direct textual parallels between the Lisao and Jia Yi's Diao Qu Yuan, or Mourning Qu Yuan, or then again between Xi Shi, Regretting the Oath, also attributed to Jia Yi, and other pieces in the anthology, these are not quotations in the sense that one author cites the work of another. They are usages of shared poetic material. Consider the passage that in the Shiji biography leads to the account of the composition of the Lisao. Qu Ping was distressed that the king's listening was undiscerning, slander and slur obscured insight, the twisted and the crooked harmed the common good, the square and the straight were no longer given a place. Thus, he worried and grieved in dark thoughts and created Encountering Sorrow. The 4 lines in the middle of this quotation that I have tried to highlight in my recitation all follow the same syntactical and rhythmic structure, and they are rhymed, they are poetry. They are a poetic fragment of unknown origin, possibly once again in Qu Yuan's own voice. The fragment is evidence for the existence of quote-unquote Qu Yuan poetry outside of the known anthology, poetry that may have circulated in a variety of smaller units and was combined with other texts, as it is here with Qu Yuan's prose biography. In such combinations, the figures of subject and object, of protagonist and autobiographical poet could easily switch sides, just as the lines between biography and autobiography are blurred elsewhere. For example, in Bu Ju and Yu Fu. Thus, the letter text Yu Fu, that is Qu Yuan's dialogue with a fisherman, appears twice. First, as a narrative part of the biography, and second, in Qu Yuan's own voice within the anthology. In the biography, Qu Yuan has the final word of the dialogue, highly emotional and personal. I shall better throw myself into the ever-flowing stream and bury myself in the bowels of the river fish. How could I take my brilliant clarity and have it obscured by the confused blur of the world? After this follows a single narrative sentence. Quote, then he made the poetic exposition of Huaisha. Unquote. And after the full text of Huaisha, only one more thing is left to say. Quote, thereupon he embraced a stone and drowned himself in the Milo River. This is the moment when the dual nature of Qu Yuan as both poetic hero and heroic poet, as the figure in the text and the author of the text, breaks down. If Qu Yuan, the hero, is an archaic figure of noble solitude who acts decisively in the last moments of his life, Qu Yuan, the poet, whose work survives his suicide, cannot have just made his highly sophisticated poem on the spot, nor could this creation have survived from such a moment. If Qu Yuan, the hero, facing his fate, was alone when drowning himself in the Milo River, with loneliness being a central motif of his legend, then Qu Yuan, the poet, responding to fate, was not alone when composing and reciting Huaisha. For Han readers, this contradiction did not matter. Poet and hero could easily switch places. I thus think of Qu Yuan's biography and poetry as a single repertoire of shared expressions, a body of textual material that was composed and performed in different forms on different occasions. This model of circumscribed poetic fluidity relieves us of authorial attributions whose fictionality is blindingly obvious. It accounts for the dense intertextual relations and modular exchanges between different compositions. It situates the Qu Yuan story in social practices of poetic exchange, performance, and variation. The Eastern Han commentator Wang Yi himself offers the lead. For the Jiuzhang, which include Huaisha, he notes that after Qu Yuan's death, quote, the people of Chu grieved and mourned him. Generation after generation appraised his phrases and transmitted his verse from one to the next, unquote. Likewise with Tianwen, Wang Yi says, the people of Chu mourned and grieved over Qu Yuan. They collectively appraised and transmitted the poem, and this is why it is said not to be in a meaningful order, unquote. For Yu Fu, Wang Yi states, the people of Chu longed and yearned for Qu Yuan, and for this reason arranged his phrases so as to transmit them onward, unquote. Thus, as we can see, for Wang Yi, it is implausible that the pieces of Jiuzhang emerged from his suicide. Yu Fu talks about Qu Yuan in the third person, and Tianwen is too disorderly to be Qu Yuan's own final composition. Moreover, for the Jiuge, Wang Yi sees Qu Yuan more as an editor than as an original author. Because the southern religious songs which he encountered in exile were below vulgar and base, Qu Yuan remade them in order to give expression to his own feelings. Thus, Wang Yi says, quote, "Their textual sense is incoherent, their stanzas and lines are mixed up, and they broadly diverge in their principal meaning," unquote. Authorship in this sense is communal, composite, and distributed across the roles of compilers, editors, collators, and commentators. This would not have been lost to figures like Liu An, Liu Xiang, and Wang Yi as they engaged in their own successive efforts of reorganizing the Chuzi anthology and of the Qu Yuan legend within it. But through their own poetic contributions to the anthology, they also still created an authorial model for themselves, with Qu Yuan as their spiritual ancestor. As this author came into view, Western Han writers responded explicitly to him. Liu An with his Lisao Zhuan, Sima Qian with the Shiji Biography, and in particular Liu Xiang with his Jiu Tan, where for the first time in the tradition he mentions the title Jiuzhang and attributes the Jiuzhang to Qu Yuan. The Jiu Tan are written precisely in the style of the Jiuzhang, down to structural devices such as proems and epilogues, and they move freely between speaking about Qu Yuan in the third person and impersonating him in the first. Indeed, it appears that Liu Xiang's voice in the Jiu Tan, more than any earlier one, defined the persona of Qu Yuan specifically as that of the Jiuzhang, that is, the voice of personal lament that is ancestral to Liu Xiang's own lament about his suffering. Liu Xiang's Qu Yuan is a Qu Yuan in Liu Xiang's own image, and Liu Xiang's own voice is developed by way of defining Qu Yuan's. Before Liu Xiang, the Qu Yuan lore had been far more diverse, comprising not only the lamentations of the Jiuzhang, but also the religious songs of the Jiuge, the mythology of Tianwen, and others more. Only one composite text finally unites these distinct elements in a single poem, but at a considerable cost. This poem is marked by an internal diversity of voice, perspective, and lexicon, and by numerous moments of rupture, repetition, and sudden discontinuity. This is the poem we know as the Lisao. Its structure will be analyzed in the third and final episode of my podcast.
Let us thank Professor Kern for such a stimulating talk. We look forward to his presentation of the last episode next Tuesday.